Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. During the 1960s, a lot of popular musicians had formal musical training. One of the best groups of the 60s was Jefferson Airplane. They did a rock and roll version of Ravel's Bolero called White Rabbit. It was a song about taking drugs and had some very interesting lyrics. When logic and proportion have fallen sloppy dead. 60 years ago, that described drug abuse. But now it would be a good description of both Western journalism and Western government. Here's a good example of some journalism lacking any proportion and any logic. Heatwave melts nearly 6 trillion kilograms of Greenland's ice in 3 days. Ice in the area, which is usually well below freezing, has melted nearly 6 trillion kilograms in just 3 days. That's enough water to leave almost the entire area of Northern Ireland standing in a foot of water. 6 trillion kilograms is 6 billion metric tons. Let's take a look now and see how that compares with what normally happens on the Greenland ice sheet during summer. On average, the Greenland ice sheet gains about 580 billion tons of ice from the beginning of September through the first week in June the following year. And then during their 70-day summer melt season, they normally lose about 210 billion tons. So on average during summer, Greenland's ice sheet loses about 3 billion tons of ice every day. But this article says they lost 6 billion tons in 3 days, which works out to about 2 billion tons per day. 2 billion tons per day is less than the long-term average of 3 billion tons per day. In fact, ice loss on the Greenland ice sheet this summer has been well below normal, as it has been for 4 of the last 6 years. During almost every day this summer, the surface mass balance of Greenland has been above average, which means they're losing ice at a slower rate than normal. On some snowy days, Greenland's surface gains 10 billion tons of mass. The 6 billion tons in 3 days sounds very impressive until you look at the actual data and realize that it's not very interesting. During the winter, Greenland's surface can gain that much mass in just a few hours. Now let's look at this sentence. The meltwater is enough to leave almost the entire area of Northern Ireland standing in a foot of water. The Greenland ice sheet is about 20 times larger than Ireland, which means there's enough ice in Greenland to cover Ireland with more than 20 miles of water. What they did in this article was take a few numbers completely out of context and completely out of proportion. The only logic being used here is another attempt to scare the readers into being afraid of low-cost, reliable energy. Northern Greenland's largest glacier, the Petermann Glacier, has been growing about 1 kilometer every year for the past 10 years. There's no indication of anything unusual going on in Greenland. This is all fake news designed to deceive. Toto has been pulling back the curtain on these fraudsters in the press for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki and Upala on the web at RealClimateScience.com.